saying different. Good morning or good afternoon, John.
Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, you're probably thinking, well, what's going on? Why is Amar dressed in the way that he is? Such like I'm sat in Riyadh, is where I am in Saudi Arabia. So, yeah, forgive me if
No problem. No
not
problem.
very. Well, wonderful to have you on the show, John. Can you hear me all right?
I can, yes. Thank you.
And let's kick off. So let's start with who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
So I always say this, John, in a nutshell. So the past 20 years, I've worked in, well, first off, thank you again for having me. So me in a nutshell, I've worked the past 20 years in the healthcare sector. In 2016, I was diagnosed with bowel cancer and fluid on the brain. Bowel cancer, purely surgery, not an issue, not a problem. But then when they drained the fluid off my brain, they filled my head with air. So I officially tell people I'm an airhead now. But I ended up on intensive care, being fully ventilated and the family being prepared for the worst. And from that, it just left me with a few deficits around fatigue and balance issues. And since then, I found it staying in employment was quite difficult. So in 2021, I started Eagles Wings Consultancy to help organisations understand disability in the workplace. Because when it comes to those softer adaptations around fatigue, they're not always as confident. So I'm there to help them, and also to help them understand, as soon as they mention the word adaptations, the first thing people think of is wheelchair and cost, where quite often, the smaller, low-cost adaptations can have such a huge impact. Like I've got a background from my Zoom, which may be able to see, which just says, if I pause, if I have a bit of a timeout, or I'm asked to repeat something, it's because my brain's working quite hard, and it's just catching up. The easy way I describe it is, if you've got your computer on and you have 10 tabs open, your computer slows down a little bit. Mine slows down on 2. And that's how I function. That sometimes I just need to repeat things and say, all right, I got that. So yeah, I'm happy to encourage and support organisations in disability employment.
Yeah, no, thank you, John. I'm ever so grateful for you sharing that inspirational story, really, in regards to your challenge, your near death experience, to put it bluntly, right? So tell us, John, before we get into what you're doing now and the type of things that got you justly and deservedly to become an award winner at the inclusion by default as well. But just I suppose purely from a curiosity perspective, John, tell me. So you were in hospital, and then what happened?
So what happened was, when I come out of hospital, it kind of took me. It actually took me a bit of time to realise that my brain injury was affecting me. So one of the things that I was struggling with is that when I'm fatigued, I get clumsy. So I was finding that I was spilling tea just after I'd made a cup of tea, thinking I was clumsy, but actually it was because I was fatigued and I wasn't connecting those dots. And so talking to people around me, they said, it's your brain injury that's affecting me. So then when I made those dots and connections, I was able to put coping strategies in place to make sure that I didn't get fatigued. So I wasn't as clumsy. Sometimes with brain injury, you do lose a little bit of self-insight. So it's having those straightforward conversations of well, what's changed since this. My personality's changed a bit. How I interact changed a bit. So it's being able to be open to that introspective and extrospective points of view to kind of find out who the new me is and how I function. And then putting that into the workplace, how I function in the workplace, so for me, a lot of stimulus becomes an effect on my fatigue. how I operate as a person. So I brought those in place to make sure that I can function well. And with those slight changes, and that's the thing, is they didn't have to be big things. Just those little changes to make sure that I'm get me rest, that I'm not over fatigued, that I've got, when I'm out and about, I've got places to stop. I live at the coast. I can tell you where every seat is from time out to Whitley Bay, because I've needed to stop and rest. But it's planning those little things ahead.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And curiosity, and please, feel free not to answer. So, John, before you ended up in hospital, um, what what was your sort of career, profession? What did you do prior to that?
So I'd worked for about 13 years with Marie Curie in the community. Then I'd worked for about 5 or 6 years in neurosurgery high dependency as a healthcare assistant. So I've got that healthcare background. And then I was starting to look at more sort of senior roles within organisations outside of like what I would call the clinical role on the wards.
Yeah.
So developing that. I've done a little stint in Bulgaria doing some kind of humanitarian work. I lived in Bulgaria for 3 months, doing humanitarian work there, which was a fantastic experience. And then when I came back to the UK from that I started having all the health issues.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. And then, rather than sort of just living with these changes and things like that, you decided to do something about it to support others, using your caring background, your supportive background. So tell us a little bit about Eagle's Wings Consultancy then.
So yeah, because of my background and what I've had to take stock of what I can do, where I can still do quite a lot. It's quite interesting. As soon as you mentioned brain injury, the imagery that people come up with of what I would be like as a person, what I can do, what I can't do, and quite often I found the focus was more on what I can't do rather than what I can do.
Okay.
And it's like, well, I can do quite a lot. I just need a little bit of a support in this bit. So that's where I thought I like the idea of an eagle. So an eagle, when it's planning its prey, can hover a mile away from its prey and plan its route in on how it's going to do what it's going to do. When I can sort of like, in a way, hover over a business, see from a distance what needs to be done to be more inclusive, and then come in with a plan to help them develop that. Again, just hovering over them and supporting them in that. So Eagle's Wings has been there. We do training to help disability awareness. I do a one-to-one, more of a team talk thing, which can be one-to-one or groups where I actually talk from my own experience. But also it's like get the conversation going about, can I use that language? What's that word like? How do I start a conversation with somebody with a disability? And it's a safe space where we can actually get to those conversations going, and then we can do things like overlooking at policies and procedures. Because I strongly believe that if we can have the policies and procedures, but if the culture's not right within the organisation, then they don't get implemented effectively. So will it help bring that culture change?
Yeah, no, wonderful. And I think it's great. There's that support there, and especially from someone with lived experience, right? Because sometimes, people who are training tend to have done a course somewhere and then would deliver it and have conversations and become inclusivity or whatever type experts and have limited or little lived experience. So talk us through a little bit of that training. What does that look like, John? Can someone expect? And why would somebody reach out to Eagle's Wings Consultancy? Like, in what circumstance?
So thank you for that. It is really interesting to come from the lived experience point of view, and I think in a lot of ways I'm different from a lot of people in the fact that because I got my brain injury later in life, I've got that experience of working in the workplace without a brain injury, and now working
Yes.
with a brain injury. So I can bring those two lived experiences together to help improve conditions for those who have disability in the workplace. The training basically comes around from having a look at what do we classify as disability, what do we consider to be disability, and I also include that a lot of the mental health disability as well. So it's not always just about the physical; it's about the visible and the non-visible disabilities, about the language that we use. I always encourage putting people first wherever we can. So it's a person with a disability rather than a disabled person. So at least then I feel valued as a person. And it's one of those little changes that actually makes a big difference. So it's coming back to help organizations realize that as soon as you mention like diversity, as soon as you mention disability, they think it's going to be this huge task to undertake, where actually it's you might have to build up to if you need such things as accessibility for wheelchairs, then we can look at that. But actually, there's a lot of stuff you can do before that. It's not necessarily going to cost a lot. It's not necessarily going to be difficult to implement, but can have a massive impact. And as an organization, when you start employing people with disabilities, you start having a different outlook, you start thinking in a different way because you start adapting and have adaptive practices. So it helps bring that adaptive practice into the workplace, that people think, oh, well, actually, we can do that different. Can we do this different? So it increases the diversity of the workforce. It helps me as a disabled person with my mental health, so I feel better, so my health improves in general. And then there's the economic value of having people who with disabilities working. I think at the minute, I think there's the statistics are 4.4 million people with disabilities are working. So if we can continue to work with a small amount of support, we can bring masses of value to an organisation, and that again, that different viewpoint of how to work.
Brilliant. And thank you for sharing. I suppose part of the inclusion by the type of conversation is having might perceive or deemed a uncomfortable conversation, right? So simple things like what is a person with a disability? What defines how do I sort of you kindly considered me in your business card that you hand out, the visual that you've got behind you, but other times I may not know, oh my gosh, how do I say that to that person in a wheelchair or with a crutch or actually without an arm or without a leg, or there's visible disabilities as well as invisible disabilities. Absolutely. So how do I get comfortable with having that type of conversation?
I normally try and narrow things down to two questions. It's like, how does your disability affect you? What support do you need from me? Just keep it simple. By saying people, what do you need from me? And yeah. I'm my own expert in my own disability. If you ask me what I need, I can rattle it off quick. This is what I need. I need this, this, and this. If you ask someone what do you need from me, they'll rattle it off quick enough. So it's just having that open conversation, being able to say, well, what do you need from me? Do you need anything? Some people might be fine and say, no, I'm good. I'm all right. I can cope with everything. It's not an issue. But just being able to feel comfortable to say, what do you need from me? And certainly for myself, one of the things I do is if I'm working in an office environment, I've got a laminate that says, if you say these symptoms, it's my brain injury affecting me. So sometimes if my brain's affecting me, I can be a little bit grumpy. And, if you work in an office, if you say, good morning, John, you're like, well, let's leave him alone. But it actually says if I'm grumpy, it could be my brain injury. And then at the end, it says, check in on me. So now you can say, John, are you all right? And I could say, well, I'm just having a bad day. We all have bad days. So, it could just be that. Or I can actually now start to say, oh, well, actually, I've got a bad head. My brain injury is affecting me. I just need another 5 minutes. And now it becomes a natural conversation. So being able to being open to just ask that very basic question of what do you need from me?
And it is a natural.
Let you know, this is what I need. And then we can build policies around that. we can build adaptations around that if need be. But just very simple, what do you need from me is probably the best place to start.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great tip, uh, advice. John, some organizations and people, individuals don't like the word disabled, from a political correctness part, but actually it says exactly what it is. You're less able, so you have a slight disability. Yeah, so that varies. How do you feel about that? As in how?
Well, I think language is important, and finding the right language. I think there's always going to be somebody that feels more comfortable or less comfortable with it. But certainly from my own perspective, I can look at it this way. Before my brain injury, I was able to do stuff. After my brain injury, there's some stuff I'm not able to do. So therefore I've been disabled. So it's that kind of like understanding that there's still ability in disability. One of my first posts I ever done on social media was I can't paraglide one-handed while eating cake. There again, neither can most able-bodied people. So as soon as you mention the word disability, the focus tends to shift onto straight away, what can't you do? Instead, so I'm trying to get people to say, well, focus on what people can do, and then we can get the support in for areas that they need a little bit of help and support with. So it's that little bit of a shift of change of what we understand as disability. I think having the word disability, it's a difficult one. And I think we're used to the idea of having disability. When you hear that word, it's the same as when you hear any of the words around inclusion and different things. It's like, what image does that create for you? And that's when we can have that introspective idea of what that means. I stood in front of one group of people and asked them to describe what a person with a brain injury is. And they immediately said, and they were all employers, they immediately said, oh, well, that's somebody who's in a wheelchair, somebody who needs feeding. And I said, that's possible. There is people with brain injuries who need that level of care, but I've got a brain injury. And for all they were all very apologetic, I said, the difficulty I now have is if you're employers and that's your image of brain injury, I'm in the bin pile as soon as I apply for a job, because that's the concept of what you think somebody with a brain injury is. So what I'm trying to do is let people say that just because somebody's got a disability, and I know some people may feel that word uncomfortable, it just simply means that there's something I need a little bit of support with. That's all. That's all disability means, is like in life, to function at work, to function within life, I just need a little bit of support. And if I get that, I can function fully as anybody else who doesn't have a disability. So I think there's a lot of work to still be done about that wording. And I know some people feel uncomfortable with it, and I never want to. I never like to feel that whatever I've said's made somebody uncomfortable. And it's about having those conversations about, well, why does that make you uncomfortable? What does that word particularly make you feel uncomfortable about? And then we can have in-depth conversations and understanding about what that means and how we can help someone move forward with it.
Yeah, and actually, one of the challenges being an adult is how we struggle being curious, as in young people and children in particular. I love them because of their curiosity. They'll say something different. Oh, why is that person that color? Or why does that person like that? As parents, we go, oh, be quiet, don't say anything. It's like, whereas actually, being comfortable with having those type of conversations would lead to more dialogue and more inclusion.
Yes, and that's why I'm very open about my disability. That's why I'm very open about what I do and where I go whenever I'm networking and whether I'm out and about. I'm very open about it. I've got no problem if anybody asks any questions, because it's bringing that into the normal conversation.
Great. John, we're running out of time. Sorry.
Sorry.
I didn't mean to cut. I just wanted to say congratulations at winning the award in the last 10 seconds. What did it mean to you?
It means so much that so the whole thing's about having cities of belonging where people can feel included in the whole city. The fact that we're making progress in having cities of belonging that are actually going to happen and happening across the UK is fantastic, because it's going to improve the lives for all those with many diversities.
Thank you so much. Congratulations once again, John. Grateful for your time. Hopefully catch up with you when I'm back in the UK, and probably one of the inclusion events or the curriculum or a pledge event, whatever it is. We'll be connecting with you further, more formally as well, using your activities and approach in our inclusion ID. Thank you ever so much. Take care, John.
Thanks very much, Alan. Take care now. Bye.